Okay, Rabbi Sai, we're on DAF Gimel Amid Aleph, and while we were talking about the whole idea of a sukkah higher than 20 amos, we also brought in the concept of the minimal shear of the floor space of a sukkah, the spaciousness of a sukkah. We had seen that you need to have Rosho, Rubo, and Shulchano. That was part of our discussion. We're going to elaborate on that discussion today. Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak, it's about a dozen lines down. He says, Halacha tzricha shetei machzekes Rosho v'rubo v'shulchano. The halacha is that a sukkah needs to be large enough so that you can fit the table, your body, or the majority of your body, and your head. Amar le Rabbi Abba Kiman Kibei Shammai. This is presented as a challenge. Who does this go like? It goes like Beis Shammai. Now, in order to understand the presuppositions, the premises of our Gemara, all I ask is that you turn to DAF Chav Ches Amud Aleph for just one moment, just to take a look at two lines from a Mishnah. Okay, the Gemara is assuming that you know this Mishnah when it has this discussion. The Mishnah on DAF Chav Ches Amud Aleph states as follows: Misha hayarosho v'rubo b'sukkah v'shulchano b'soch habayis. If a person's head and body and table is inside, his head and his body is inside the sukkah, and his table is inside the house. So Beis Shammai poslin u Beis Hillel machshirin. In that case, Beis Shammai says it's puzzle, and Beis Hillel says it's kosher. That's all you need to see. The Gemara is saying that if you're telling me, Rav Shmuel, that you need to have the table also in the sukkah, it sounds like you're going like Beis Shammai, who says that when the table is outside the sukkah, it's puzzle. So the Gemara says, Amar le Ella Kiman. So he said, who else am I going to go like? In other words, that's all. That's he's basically saying yes. He's answering like, what else? That's basically, it's like a Jewish answer. What else am I supposed to go like? Like, in other words, normally we don't really accept the fact that an Amora should paskin like Beis Shammai, and that's why Rabbi Abba was startled when Reb Shmuel said that. But Reb Shmuel responds, you know what? Yeah, Taka, I go like Beis Shammai in this case. Ika da Amri, Amar Rabbi Abba da Amar Lachmani. So some learned that the back and forth was that Rabbi Abba said, who told you that? Amar lei Beis Shammai hi v'lo tazuz mina. And Reb Shmuel acknowledged this goes according to Beis Shammai and don't move away from it. Meaning, even though normally we don't go like Beis Shammai, this is one of the few times that we do. So Maskef la Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, mimai de Beis Shammai Beis Hillel b'sukkah ketana pligi, dilma b'sukkah gedola pligi. Where do you see in that Mishnah that we just saw in Daf Chav Ches that they're talking about the minimal size of the sukkah? Maybe the discussion is about a large sukkah. Uchegon di Yosef apuma de metalalta v'shulchano b'soch habayis to Beis Shammai savri gazrinan shema yimashech achar shulchano u'Beis Hillel savri lo gazrinan. Really, if you could really very easily read that mission in a totally different light. It's not talking about the minimal shear of a sukkah. It's talking about a very large sukkah, but your wife said, leave the table, your sukkah is adjacent to the house, and your wife said, leave the table in the house. I don't want to have to schlep all the food all the way into the sukkah. I'm just going to put it on the table in the house, and you'll sit at the edge of the sukkah by the door of the sukkah, and that's how you'll eat. And that way it'll be good for you, it'll be good for me, and everyone will be happy. So the sukkah could be humongous. But that's the discussion, that Beis Shammai say that that's not okay, because we're worried that since the food is outside the sukkah, you're going to be drawn after you're eating, and therefore you'll be sitting outside the sukkah while you're eating. And Beis Hillel say no, as long as you're careful to always look up and make sure that you're in the sukkah, you're okay. The dikanami, and by the way, the language implies what I'm suggesting as well. Dikitani misha hayarosho v'rubo b'sukkah v'shulchano b'soch habayis Beis Shammai poslin u'Beis Hillel machshirin. Notice that the subject of the Mishnah is not the sukkah. The subject of the Mishnah is the person, and it's describing his position. It says if he's positioned that the majority of his body and his head are inside the sukkah and his table is outside, so then Beis Shammai say that it's no good and Beis Hillel say that it's okay. And if you were going to argue that they were arguing about the minimal shear of a sukkah, then the subject of the Mishnah should not be the man, the subject of the sukkah should be the sukkah. Can the sukkah contain you and your table or not? That's what the Mishnah should have been discussing. But it doesn't say that. It's not, the subject of the Mishnah is not the sukkah. The subject of the Mishnah is the person and how he's positioned. So the Gemara says, now wait a minute. Uvasuka ketana lo pligi? You mean to tell me that you're reading the Mishnah that way, that they're not discussing a small sukkah? V'hatanya, look at the following brisa. Machzekes roshu v'ruba v'shulchanu kisheira, that when the sukkah can contain, because of the size of the sukkah, it can contain him and his table, so then it's kosher. And Rabbi Omer, ad sheyeheba arba amos al arba amos. And Rabbi disagrees, and he says, a shir that we saw yesterday, that the sukkah has to be 4 amos by 4 amos in order to be kosher. B'tanya idach, now we have another brisa, that Rabbi Omer kol sukkah shein ba arba amos al arba amos besula, b'chachamim omrim, afilu eina machzekes el aroshu v'rubo kishera. That in this brisa, Rabbi is quoted the same as the previous brisa, that it has to be 4 by 4. But the Chachamim are quoted differently. The Chachamim who argue with Rebbe say that as long as your body can fit inside, it's kosher. V'ilu shulchano lo ketani. But in the second brisa, it doesn't say that your table has to fit. It just says that you have to fit in the sukkah. So kashana hadadi. So these two brises seem to contradict each other. So elalav shmamina habe shamai habe silo. So the only way to reconcile it is to say that the machlokas that is on the Mishnah on Rav Chavches is the way to reconcile the two brises. That one, the first brisa that says both you and your table have to fit in the sukkah goes like Beis Shammai, and the second brisa that says that only you have to fit into the sukkah goes like Beis Hillel. So I've demonstrated that you see very clearly from these brises that they are arguing about the size of the sukkah, and not just of the positioning of the person. So Amar Mar Zutra Masnisa Namidika, and Mar Zutra says, I'll go even further. The language of the Mishnah on DAF Chavches Taka implies that we're talking about the sukkah size. Midakatani Beishamai Poslam Beisal Machshirin V'misa Beishamai Omrim Lo Yatsa Beisal Omrim Yatsa Mi Boile. Because what is the language of the Mishnah Daf Chavches? The language of the Mishnah is talking about the object of the sukkah. Beis Shammai says that the sukkah is puzzle, and Beis Hillel say that the sukkah is kosher. And according to what you're suggesting, that we're not talking about the sukkah, but we're talking about the positioning of the man, and the subject is the man, and is the man yotzei, it should have said, Beis Shammai says the man is not yotzei the mitzvah, and Beis Hillel say the man is yotzei the mitzvah. So you see, so then the question is, the Gemara says, Velakasha mishahaya. Well then, let's go back to the first inference of the language. We had inferred previously from the language of the Mishnah that the subject is the man, not the sukkah. So it's a bit of a contradiction in and of itself. Minei ubei in the Mishnah, is the subject the man and the way he's positioned, or is the subject the sukkah and its size? Which one is it? So la'olam betarte pligi. So the Gemara says, you're right. Really, there's two machloikos between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Pligi besukkah ketano, pligi besukkah gedola. They both argue about the minimal shear of a small sukkah, and they argue about the positioning of a person when the table is outside and he's inside regarding a larger sukkah. And the Mishnah was merely economizing on language, and really the way that you're supposed to read it is by inserting the following. Misha hayarosho verubo besukkah v'shulchano besocha bayis. First part is talking about a large sukkah, and we're talking about the person himself. That if a person was, his body was inside the sukkah, his table is outside the sukkah, Beis Shammai omrim lo yatso, Beis Hillel omrim yatso. So Beis Shammai say that you're not yotzei because we're worried that you're going to stretch out outside the sukkah to eat your food. And Beis Hillel say we're not worried about that, and you are yotzei the mitzvah. V'she'ena machzekes ela kedei roshu v'rubo bilvad, Beis Shammai poslim v'Beis Hillel machshirin. And furthermore, the second issue is, what if the sukkah is so small that it cannot hold anything other than you, but your table cannot fit in? So there, Beis Shammai say that the sukkah is puzzle, that's the subject of the sukkah, and Beis Hillel say the sukkah is still kosher. So there you see it. You see it, therefore, that we now have two machlokos between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. We'll have to remember this when we get back to Daf Chav Ches in the Daf Yomi in a few weeks from now. We'll go back and remind ourselves of this Gemara. Now, Man Tana Laha Tana Rabbanan. Who is the author of the following brisa? Now, in order to understand this, remember what we just said, that according to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he has a shita that is more machmir than both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And he says that the minimal shear of a sukkah is not Rosho Verubo Vishulchano, but it's even larger. It has to be 4 amos by 4 amos. Now let's look at the following brisa and see who the author is. Baya she'ein bo arba amos al arba amos, that if a house is smaller than 4 by 4 amos in its floor plan, patr min ha-mezuzah u min ha-ma'akeh ve'eino metame b'negoyim ve'ein nechlat bevate orechoma ve'ein chozrin olav me'orchei ha-milchama. We'll learn these first 5. It's patr from a mezuzah. There's no mitzvah of mezuzah. It's patr from making a parapet on its roof, because it's not a requisite size of a house where the Torah describes making a parapet. And it's not subject to the laws of tsaras habayis, where the Torah talks about that if one of the stones develops a mold, then that's a sign of tsaras. No, not this house. And it's not nechlat bebate orechoma. The Torah has a law that if I sell a house in a walled city, then I have 1 year to buy it back from the purchaser. If I don't buy it back from the purchaser within that 1 year, then it becomes permanently the possession of the purchaser, and I no longer have any rights to it. Now that's different from property, from all other houses that are outside a walled city, and it's also different from a garden that's in a walled city. If I sell a garden in a walled city, a piece of real estate, so the halacha is that I have until Yovel to buy it back, and at Yovel it automatically reverts back to me. So what the brisa is telling me is that since this house is not called a house halachically, it doesn't have the din that if I sell it, I only have a year to buy it back. If I sell it, it's like selling a field, because it's not a house. And therefore I have until Yovel to buy it back. And ve'ein chozron olav me'orchei milchama means, the Torah tells me that if a man has built a house, then within the first year of building the house, he has an exemption from doing army service because of the pathos of a person building a new home and not having a chance to live in it. So therefore, if a person builds this shack, this shanty, we say that's so tiny, it's less than 4 by 4 amos, that's not enough of a house that he can use to exempt himself from army service. I mean, just think about it. A guy could take a piece of corrugated cardboard and put it up and say, "Oh, I built a house. I'm putter from serving in the army." No, it's got to be a house that you can live in, right? Said, so now the next 3 halachas are ve'ein ma'arvin bo, ve'ein mishtatfin bo, ve'ein manichin bo eruv. So let's just understand these halachas. The halacha of eruv chatzeros is as follows. That we've learned this in Eruvin, but just a quick review. If you have multiple homes that are within one chatzer, so the halacha is, in order to allow us to all carry from our homes to the chatzer, and within the chatzer, we have to do something called an eruv. We have to combine forces to become one corporate entity. And the way that we do that is we all contribute bread, and we put it in one collective container, and we put that bread in one home. And that home is considered to be the base or the domicile that unifies all of the inhabitants, such that we're all considered to be one happy family. Okay, that's the box of matzah that we have for the Eruv. So basically, what the brisa is saying is that we don't rely on this house to be the house that, that's ve'ein manichin bo eruv, that's the third one, is that this is not the house that you can put the box of matzahs in, because you have to put it in a house. But you can't use this house. But furthermore, the first 2 items are, what if there's one regular house in the chutzner, and then there's a little tiny structure in the chutzner that is this less than 4 by 4 amos structure, which belongs to another guy. We don't have to reckon with that guy because he's not called a resident, because that structure is not called a house. So therefore, we don't require him to contribute bread for the purpose of the Eruv. We don't have to reckon with him at all. And the same thing is when we're making shitufei mavuos. Now what that means is that let's say we have two chutzers on either side of a mavi, on either side of an alleyway, and we want to be able to carry from our chutzers to the alleyway. The way to do that is to incorporate both chutzers together. Let's say you've got, instead of two chutzers, one on either side, you've got a chutzer on one side and that little structure on the other side. You don't have to reckon with that guy. You don't have to worry about him. He doesn't have to make, you don't have to make an Erev with him because he's not called a resident. That structure is not enough of a structure. And that's what it means, ve'ein mishtatfin bo. That's the word mishtatfin is in the context of a mavoi, and the word ma'arvin is in the context of a chutzer, but they really mean the same thing. Okay, let us go on. Next, ve'ein osin oso ibur bein shtei ayoros. The next halacha is that we know that if you have a city and its outskirts, there's 70 amos on the outskirts of a city, and you can walk 2,000 amos beyond that point on Shabbos, beyond the 70 amma outskirts of the city, which is called the karfeif of the city. Now, what we need to understand is that if you have two cities that are adjacent to each other, that if their 70 amma extensions intersect with each other, then the two cities, for halachic purposes, are called one city, and therefore I have 2,000 amos in all directions of both cities, not just from one city. However, let's say that the cities are situated such that they are just a little bit they're not intersecting anymore their 70 amma city limits, but they're just almost touching, but they're not exactly connected. If there's a house that is in between the two places, so that house acts as a bridge, to act as a conduit between those two cities to make them as one city. But the chiddush of this brisa is that if that conduit structure is this less than 4 by 4 amma structure, then it doesn't act as a bridge because it's not reckoned with halachically as being a structure at all.
Is there a downside to this to Oniyam? I mean, like, for example, let's say someone who's very poor, he goes off to war, and that's all he really could build. That's his house. That's where he lives, you know? I mean, it's kind of counterintuitive to how we think of chesed.
Yeah, but it's less than dalet al dalet. It's not a structure. It's not a house.
Where he lives.
He can't live in that. That's not called living. It's like being homeless.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
It's not a BAYT. It's homeless.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So, and then the final halacha of the brisa is ve'ein ha'achin v'hashutfin cholkin bo. Now, this language is ambiguous, and the Havamina, the Gemara, thinks that if it's less than 4 by 4 amos, and it's owned by two partners or two brothers, and let's say they want to dissolve the partnership and say you take half and I'll take half, so you can't do it if the structure is less than dalet al dalet because you don't have enough to split it in half, and therefore you have to either one has to buy out the other one, but you can't say we'll put up a wall between us and we'll split. Anyway, that's the understanding initially of this line. But anyway, the Gemara's point is lema rebihi velo rabbanan. Let us suggest that this brisa goes according to Rabbi and not to Chachamim, because you notice that the minimal shear of a house is 4 by 4, whereas the Rabbanan said by Sukkah the minimal shear is Rosho, Rubo, and Shulchano. It's it's a much smaller shear, like we said yesterday, is 7 by 7 tfachim. It's much smaller. So the Gemara says no. Afilu tema Rabbanan adkan lo kami Rabbanan hasam elul inyan Sukkah the diras Aryai. Avol lagabi bias the diras kevahu. Afilu Rabbanan modu di isbe dalat amos dairi beinshi ve'ilolo dairi beinshi. So the Gemara says no. It's only regarding Sukkah that we have a machlokas as whether it's 4 by 4 amos or Rosha, Rubo, and Shulchano, because it's a temporary dwelling. Temporarily, a person can reside in a place that's much narrower than 4 by 4 amos. But as a permanent residence, no one's going to live in a permanent residence that's less than 4 by 4. Even the Chachamim, who are more liberal for the shear of a sukkah, would agree that a house halachically has to be at least 4 by 4 amos. Okay, now let's go back and analyze all of these halachas. Omar mar potr min hamezuzah umin hama'akeh ve'in metame bin agoyim ve'eino nechlat bevate orichoma ve'in chosen lov me'orchei hamilchama. So these were the first 5 halachos, which we explained that if it's less than 4 by 4, it's potter from mezuzah. You don't need to build a parapet on the roof. It's not subject to the laws of tsaras. It's not permanently sold after a year if it's in a walled city, and it's not enough to exempt you from going and being part of the army. So my time, what is the reason why in all of these cases it doesn't count as a structure? Because the bias ksiv behu bekulu, in all of those halachas of the Torah says it has to be a bias, and this is not called a bias, and that's why those laws do not apply to this structure. Ve'ein ma'arvin bo, ve'ein mishtatfim bo, ve'ein menichin bo eruv. So, then we learned about the laws of eruvin, and it said that if you have such a structure in a chutzner, we don't have to reckon with you. We don't require you to contribute bread to either the chutzner or to the mavoi. And furthermore, we can't place the corporate box of matzahs cannot be placed in that structure. My time, adelo chazi ledira. Why? Because it's not called an inhabitable place. It's not called a residence, and since it's not called a residence, we don't have to reckon with you. So the Gemara now says, here's an interesting diuk, right? Eruve chatzeros menichin bo, aval shitif menichin bo. The only thing that the Brisa said that I'm not allowed to place into that structure is the corporate box of matzahs to incorporate the chutzner. But let's say I wanted to incorporate two chutzers that are on either side of a mavoi, and I need to leave the box of matzahs somewhere. It sounds like that I am allowed to put the box of matzahs in that structure. My time, and that's halachically accurate. And why is that true? Because when it comes to making an eruv and depositing the box of matzahs for shitufei mavuos, for incorporating two chutzers with one mavoi, you're not obligated to put the box of matzahs in a house. You can put it just out in the chutzer. And this is therefore no worse. This structure is no worse than being a chutzer itself. And how can I prove this to you? Ditnan. Eruve chatzeros b'chutzer shitufei mavoi b'mavoi. The Mishnah says that when you're making an eruv, where do you put your box of matzahs? You put it in one of the chutzers. And when you make your shituf of two chutzers that are bounding a mavoi, where do you put your box of matzahs? You put it in the mavoi. Now, what that really is telling you is that the box of matzahs has to be within that system. You can't put it in another location. But vehavinan ba eruve chatzeros b'chatzer. How can you tell me that you put the box of matzahs when you want to make an eruve chatzeros? You leave the box of matzahs out in the chatzer. V'hatnan hanosen eruvo b'veishar achsadru mirpesas eno eruv. V'hador sham eno oser. What about the Mishnah that says that if you leave the box of matzahs in a structure that is not a house, such as a sentry post, or an achsadra, a portico, or a porch, putting the box of matzahs is not okay because that's not called a house. And if a person resides in one of those non-house structures, he's not to be reckoned with. He doesn't count as a resident of the chutzner. You don't need him to contribute to the matzahs. So the Gemara says, how can you tell me that you're allowed to leave the box of matzahs out in the chutzner when we know that putting it in a structure, anything other than a house, is not okay? So ela'ema eruve chatzeros babayish b'chatzer b'shitufei mavuos b'chatzer shebemavoi. So really what the Mishnah means to convey to us is that when I put my box of matzahs down, I have to put it in a house that is within the chutzner. And it's to the exclusion of putting the box of matzahs somewhere outside of the chutzner. But it at least has to be in a house, because since we're incorporating residence, we have to put it in a place of residence, which is in a house. And by analogy, like A to B as C is to D, so just like the house is to a chutzner, so to a chutzner is to a mavoi. So when I want to incorporate a mavoi to allow it for two different chutzers, I have to deposit my box of matzahs in one of the two chutzers. I can't put it somewhere else outside of this system. But the bottom line is that what you see from here is v'hailo gara mechatzer shebemavoi, and therefore it's perfectly okay that when I want to incorporate two chutzers with one mavoi, that I'm allowed to leave the box of matzahs in this less than daled by daled structure, because since I'm allowed to leave it such a shituf in the chutzner itself, this structure is no worse than just leaving it out in the chutzner. As long as the structure is within one of the chutzers, then it's perfectly okay. So that's what the Gemara just wanted to demonstrate. Let us go on to the next case. Ve'ein osen oso ibor bein shtei ayaros. That you're not allowed to use this small structure as a bridge to connect two adjacent cities. And the Gemara just points out that filu kiburgin and lo mashvinan la. Now, this means that this structure is inferior even to a borginin. A borginin is a hut that is constructed by the guys who do mishmar hagivul. You know what mishmar hagivul is? The guys who go on patrol to watch the outskirts of an area. So you have a guy that's on mishmar hagivul. It gets cold at night, so he builds a little hut. We know the halacha is in Erevin that if there's a borginin, if there's a security guard's hut that connects the two cities, then that is okay. That does create a bridge to make the two cities count as one. But this structure does not count. Why should a sentry's hut be any different from this small structure? My time a burgin and chazul milsayu v'haylo chazil milsay. The answer is very simple. A sentry's hut serves its purpose to protect the sentry. But a structure that is called a house that is less than daled al daled does not serve its purpose, which is to act as a residence for the person who built it. It's not a residence. It's not a place where a person can live. And therefore, since it doesn't serve its purpose, it cannot act halachically as a conduit between two cities.
I don't understand the difference. I mean, it's a temporary dwelling for a guard, and it's a temporary dwelling for us for a week.
But it's not. But that's the point. When a person says, "This is my house," he designates it as a house, and it cannot serve as a house. You're not designating it as a hut. You're designating it as my home. And halachically, that's an invalid designation. It turns out that it's totally on the way that you designate it. If you designate it as a temporary place to just get respite from the elements, so then it's serving its purpose.
So sukkah is considered a house, isn't it?
No, just the opposite. According to the Chachamim, a sukkah is kosher even if it's less than daled al daled. Why? Because it's a dira sarai. It's a temporary dwelling. But this is not designated as a temporary dwelling. It's designated as a residence. But it's not a residence. So therefore, you've sort of, by your designation, you've negated its halachic significance. Okay.
Does the sentry hut have a definition of also being Aryai? In other words, is that part of it?
I don't know whether it's the issue is Aryai. Presumably it's Aryai, yeah, because it's not meant as a permanent residence. Aryai in the sense that it's not keva. Ve'ein ha'achin v'hashutfin cholkin bo. The next thing we saw in the Brisa is that brothers or partners who wish to dissolve their partnership cannot divide the house in half. So taima deles beidalad amos, ha'is beidalad amos cholkin. So you mean to tell me that if it was 4x4 or larger, then they could divide it? But we learned a Mishnah that says, no, if you want to divide a structure, it's not just enough that it's 4x4, it has to be such that after you divide it, each party will have 4x4 amos. So this is inaccurate. It should have said that they can't divide it until the structure is 8x4, not 4x4. So rather, the Gemara says, "Ela ema ein bo din chaluka kechatzer or bichatzer," as some have the girsa. But rather, what was really stated is that it doesn't have a din, it doesn't have the status of a structure when dividing up a chatzir for the floor space of the chatzir. Now, what do we mean by this? The Amar Rav Huna chatzir lefi pesacheha mischalakas. V'Rav Chisda Omar nosin l'chol Pesach u'Pesach arba amos b'hasha'ar cholkin oso b'shaveh. That these two rabbis, Rav Huna and Rav Chisda, debate the following issue. Let's say Reuven and Shimon live in a chutzner together. Reuven has his residence and Shimon has his residence. Okay? They share the chutzner equally. They're equal partners in the chutzner, and for whatever reason, they decide one day they want to divide up ownership of the chutzner. You take your acreage, and I'll take my acreage, and we'll draw a line down the middle. Okay? So the halacha is you don't just draw a line down the center of the chutzner. You have to determine what kind of residence exists for Reuven and what exists for Shimon. So there's a machlokas between Rav Huna and Rav Chisda about how you divide the chatzir. Rav Huna says it all depends upon how many front doors there are for each person. Let's say Reuven is a bachelor and he's a wealthy bachelor and he's got a big mansion on his side of the chatzir, and Shimon is a middle class guy, but he's got two sons-in-law that live with him on his side of the chatzir. So he's got three houses: his house and two other houses, one for each son-in-law. Okay. So he's got 3 front doors. Basically, Rav Huna says, since the function of a chutzner is to provide you access to your front door, and Shimon has 3 front doors and Reuben only has 1 front door, so then you divide the chutzner 75-25, right? So that Shimon gets 3/4 of the chutzner, so that because he's got 3 times as many front doors as Reuben does. Rav Chisda disagrees. Rav Chisda says that's not really equitable, and Rav Chisda says it's true that a chutzner serves partially as access to your front door, but not to that extent. He therefore says, here's how you divide it up. First, you allot a space of 4 amos in front of each front door. So you give Shimon 3 patches of property of 4 amos in front of each one of the 3 doorways. You give Reuven a patch of 4 amos in front of his 1 doorway. So it's true that Shimon will get a little bit more than Reuven, but then the remainder of the property you split 50-50 and draw a line. Okay, so that's the way they discuss it. And really, what our Bryce is trying to tell me that dahani mili bias de la mihavi koy yahivnole chatzer. Right? He says, because that's only true that you go according to the number of front doors of each residence is only when you're dealing with a real halachic house. Because since that house is meant as a permanent residence, we give him a portion of the chutzner so that he can use that portion of the chutzner to access his front door. But hi de la mister koi lo yavinun le chutzner. But this little tiny, less than 4x4 structure is not meant to remain there permanently. You're going to have to knock it down and build a real house eventually. So therefore, we don't acknowledge that as being a real front door, and we don't give you the extra space in the chutzner. That's what the Bryce's real interpretation is. Let's go on just a little bit further, and then we'll be done. We're going to go back now to our discussion of a sukkah that is higher than 20 amos, that according to the Chachamim, it's puzzle, right? So Haisa Gavoa Me'estrim Ama Ubola Ma'ato Bikar Mukasasas. So a guy has a great idea. He says, look, it's an architectural nightmare to have to lower the ceiling of this really, really high sukkah. I have a much easier idea. Let me raise the floor. And by raising the floor, I'll make it less than 20 amos and it'll be kosher. I won't have to get on any ladders. I'll just fill the floor with something. He decides, you know what? I got a bunch of pillows and cushions in my house. I'll just pile the floor with pillows and cushions, and that'll be the way I raise the floor. So lo havimiot, that's not going to work. And you know why it's not going to work? Is because one of my kids in the middle of the night is going to need something soft to sleep on. He's going to run into the sukkah. He's going to grab one of the pillows, and there goes my solution. So ve'afagav de batlinu lekulhu mishum de batla daito etzel kaladim, and that's true, by the way. Even if the balabas goes ahead and says, I hereby explicitly declare that these pillows are secluded exclusively for the use of my sukkah floor, it still doesn't work, because we say that's a nonsensical statement. Batla daito etzel kaladim means that that's not a realistic expectation. It's not something that we can expect, because most people wouldn't do that. And therefore, this guy's declaration is null and void, and the floor doesn't count as a floor, and it's still a problem. However, teven ubitlo havi miut. But let's say a person brings straw. Now, straw is usually used as animal feed. It has other functions as well, but it's something that if you explicitly say, no, I'm using it exclusively for my sukkah floor, then that's okay. The kol shekain afer ubitlo. And surely that's true if you take earth, just plain dirt, and you scatter it on the floor to raise the floor, that will surely work, as long as you explicitly nullify it and say, this dirt shall not be moved for the next 7 days. But now here's the next case. Teven ve'ein asid lefanoso ve'ofer stam. What if I put down straw, and I don't make an explicit verbal declaration of I'm not going to move this straw, but I have it in mind? Or, here's the other shaila. What if I put earth down on the sukkah floor without thinking anything at all? That's called stam. I don't make this idea, I'm never going to move it, I'm not going to move it for the next 7 days. I just put it down and say, this will be my floor, right? Without any other stipulations, either verbally or mentally. So that's a machlokas Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan. It's a machlokas between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbanan whether that's enough of a bittul to be considered a permanent floor for your sukkah. Ditnan, and here's to prove it. The Mishnah says, Bayashemil ehu teven otzeroros ubitlo mivutal. That if a person has a house and he fills up the house with straw, or he fills it up with pebbles, which is tantamount to earth, and he declares it null and void, so that it is considered to be null and void. Now, we should point out that this mission is not talking about a sukkah. This mission is talking about tumah. And the halacha is as follows. If you have a corpse inside a house, what is the status of a person that's on the roof of that house? Does he become tummy? Does the tumah, is it bokeya? Does it shoot out above the rooftop? So the answer is it depends. If there's airspace of a tefach or more between the corpse and the ceiling, then the tumah stops at the ceiling and does not go beyond the ceiling. If, however, this is what our sugya shir was about Monday night, if, however, there's less than a tefach of airspace between the corpse and the ceiling, then the tumah shoots out up until it gets to outer space. Okay? So if I go ahead and I've got a corpse inside this house and I fill the house with earth or straw such that there's no more airspace, that's really the question of the Mishnah. So if I go ahead and I nullify it and I say this is permanently the new residence of this straw or this earth, so then I've removed it permanently from having any airspace and the tumah shoots out above the rooftop. Okay? However, bit low in, low bit low low. But that's only if I explicitly state verbally that I'm hereby nullifying this straw and this earth. Vitani Allah, and then, so that goes according to the sheet of the Chachamim, who say that until you actually verbally specify, even straw and earth are not batal. But then we have a Tana who argues with that, because Vitani Allah, the Brisa then comments that Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, Teven ve'ein asid lefanoso, harehu ka'afar stam. That if you have straw, and you've just thought mentally that I'm not going to move it, so then that's like putting down earth without stipulating anything. Ubatel. And it's therefore considered to be null and void. Offer v'asilifanoso, and if you have earth, and you think explicitly that I'm going to eventually remove this earth in a day or so, so then that's not batal. Hariyo kistam tevin velo batal. Then that's like straw that you didn't have any thought expressly at all, and therefore it's not batal. So you see very clearly that according to Rabbi Yossi, when it comes to straw, as long as you have a mental affirmation that it's batal, you don't need a verbal confirmation. That's for straw. And with earth, even if you're not thinking anything at all, then that's called a bittul, and therefore it's a valid floor. And the only time that earth is a problem is if you have an express thought or declaration that you're going to remove it shortly. Then it's not batal. Have a wonderful day, everybody.